up everyone, welcome to Nodes. This video is a complete crash course of TypeORM, which is one of the most widely used ORMs, especially for Node.js. And we usually use TypeORM when we are working with Node by using TypeScript. Okay, so TypeORM especially supports TypeScript out of the box. Let's get started and see that how we will, one by one study the concepts of type ORM. So let's say the very first question we get is that why obviously we need an ORM, and now ORM stands for Object Relational Mapper. Okay, you guys can further read about it, but here I'm having a simple diagram in which I will demonstrate you that why do we need an ORM. Okay, so let's say for now let me just close this one and let me just zoom into the diagram. Okay, so let's say that for now just assume that ORM doesn't exist in this universe. Okay, so let's say what will happen if we don't have an ORM. Okay, so let's say on my right side I'm having our backend application which is using again Node and Express with TypeScript. Okay, so this is our object oriented universe, or you guys can say our functional programming universe. Okay, so since we know that TypeScript can be object oriented and same for the JavaScript, so again JavaScript can be object oriented as well as functional. So let's say we are having our object oriented and functional programming universe on our right side, and let's say somehow we need to interact with some of the relational databases. It can be Postgres or it can be MySQL. Okay, depending on your business use case. Okay, so for that what we are having our Postgres clients as well as MySQL clients, and these are npm packages which comes by default on npm. Okay, with the help of these clients you guys can easily interact with your databases from your backend application. Okay, for Postgres it is PG, and for MySQL it is a MySQL client. Okay, but the problem here is that whenever we use clients, we have to interact with our databases with the help of SQL. So on the left side, you can see that we are having SQL universe. Okay, so we all know that relational databases have SQL, and we need SQL to interact with our data in relational databases. So what we can do is in this scenario you can see that from object oriented we are passing our SQL to this client, and this client will obviously execute the SQL in our specific database, and after executing SQL, whatever the results will be, the results will be returned to this client, and this client will again send it back to our backend application. So what we are doing here is that we are converting our object oriented world to our SQL universe. Okay, so we are going from object oriented world to our SQL universe. Okay, so this is the overall scenario. Okay, now what are the problems here? Okay, so let me first give you a right over to, let's say that we are taking the scenario of a Postgres database. Okay, so for that we know we have a Postgres client for our Node.js, so we can install it by npm install pg, and then we can simply import our client, and then we have to provide the database specific parameters, which are again username, host, database name, password, and port. Okay, so based on these parameters our client will go and connect with the database, and this is the line which is connecting to our database, and after that obviously we can execute any query which we want. Okay, so you can see that we are having a single query in which we are inserting some data into our users table, in which we are having name, email, and the values are provided by these parameters $1 and $2, and $1 means that the second option, which is these values, it will pick the first value of the array as the user name and the second parameter as user email. Okay, so for executing the query we can just say client.query, we have to pass our query and we have to pass our specific values, and then we will get the result on this line, which is res.rows. Okay, and then we will end our connection. So this is the overall concept of how you interact directly with the client. Okay, but here comes the biggest disadvantage of using clients, using database clients directly in your code, because you can see here is that we are interacting with functional based programming, and in the functional based we are we are somehow using the SQL syntax right over here. Okay, so let's say what are the disadvantages of using clients. Okay, so the very first disadvantage is obviously it is harder to maintain when our application get complex, and we all know that whenever we are working on an enterprise level applications we have complex queries, and if we write complex queries in this plain SQL structure type, so obviously it will be very much harder to maintain. Okay, now second option is obviously it is difficult to debug. How whenever anything goes wrong in your queries, it is very much harder to debug debug your scenario while using clients. Okay, and obviously error handling, if some of the query fails, how to handle that scenario, it also gets very much complex if you directly use your clients. And number fifth is obviously boilerplate code. We have to write very much extra code to handle this scenario. So let's say if we want to add a user, we need to again write this query from scratch. If you want to get user, we have to select star, again we have to write the queries. So there is too much boilerplate code, included in this scenario if you are using clients. Okay, and the sixth one is, I think, is the most important point, and that is a threat of SQL injection, because users can easily inject their custom SQL by if we are using this clients. Okay, so SQL injection, I'm having a markdown of this SQL injection right over here. You can see I will give you just a simple scenario. Let's say that we are having an input box in which we are finding users with the help of username. So let's say the client or the browser, in the browser the user is sending the username, and we are sending back all the users with the respect of this username. Okay, right over here. So let's say if you are having a same scenario, we are having our client, we are connecting with these parameters, and then let's say we are having select a star from users where name is equal to $1, and this $1 is being replaced by the value which is coming from our front end through this input. Okay, so this seems very much good. But let's say now user tricks us, and user give us a different scenario. Let's say what it does is it uses a username of ABC, and then it puts the terminator, and then it writes something very much you can say error friendly. Okay, so this is the problem which will occur. Let's say user is saying that we are having a query of drop table users. Now the problem you can see right over here is that this string right over here will be replaced by this $1 parameter. Okay, so now the values coming from the input will be ABC and then terminator, and then this malicious query right over here, which is drop table users. And obviously when we will replace this thing, so this query will become equivalent to this right over here. So select star from users where name is equal to ABC and then terminator and then drop table users. So this is the point where users can inject malicious SQL in your database, and obviously it will go and drop your users table, which will be very much harmful for your database. Okay, so that's the problem of SQL injection, which comes whenever you use your plain client. Okay, so this is the problems which comes with obviously with our clients if we are using our clients. But here I want to talk one more important thing, which is this advantage of using clients. Obviously if these libraries exist, so there is a benefit. So that's why these libraries exist in our npm packages. Okay, so obviously number one is obviously performance boost, because if you are directly using clients, obviously you are directly interacting with the database, which gives you a great performance boost in your application. Okay, and the second is obviously since you are interacting directly with your database, you can have that benefit of low level control. Okay, so that's the benefits which comes with using clients. Okay, but now let's say, since it's a crash course on TypeORM, so let's say that where TypeORM or where ORM comes into the picture. Okay, so let's say what is an ORM obviously it's a keyword operational relational mapper. It's a technique used to create a bridge between object oriented and SQL. Okay, so what it does is it will give you a bridge between your object oriented programming or functional programming, and that bridge will be between your OOP and SQL databases. Okay, and here I'm having a second definition in which you can see that it's an ORM layer that connects object-oriented programming with your operational with your object-oriented programming. So what it does is it connects object-oriented programming OOP to your relational databases, and for relational databases we obviously know that we need SQL. Okay, now again definitions are always confusing. Let's see a diagram. Okay, so let's say on our right side we are having our object-oriented world, and on our left side we are having SQL universe, and in the middle you can see that we are having that type ORM. Obviously it can be any other ORM. There are tons of ORM available for Node.js, but since we are working with type ORM, so I have placed type ORM in between these this scenario. Okay, and you can see that this is the bridge which is being connected by TypeORM, since we are connecting our SQL universe with our object oriented universe. So what we can do is we can obviously pass our object oriented patterns to this TypeORM, and this TypeORM will convert our object oriented classes, or you can say those functions, into SQL universe. Okay, so this is the task which is done by TypeORM. So in simple words, you can say that TypeORM or any other ORM is a bridge between your SQL universe and your object oriented universe. So this solves a bigger problem. Okay, so let's say what are the advantages. Obviously it speeds up your development time for teams, because teams know object oriented programming, so it will speed up your development time. You don't need to write SQL queries, so that's a plus. Decrease of the cost of development. Obviously it will decrease your cost because you don't need to hire some of the database engineers who can write complex queries for you. Obviously you can simply use the object oriented patterns to write and those custom queries. And obviously most of the time this ORM will handle all the logic required to interact with this database, so everything is dependent on this ORM. Okay, obviously improve security, and one of the benefits it does resolve is that SQL injection attacks. So whenever you are using ORM, you don't have to worry about these SQL injection attacks, which we have discussed. Okay, and the fifth one is obviously one of the most liked by the developers, that you have to write less code. Okay, so you don't have to write again those plain SQL queries. You can just write the object oriented patterns, and that patterns will be automatically converted by with SQL with the help of this TypeORM. So again, OOP will be converted to SQL and will be served to these clients, and these clients will again execute these queries into the database. So that's the overall structure. Okay, so from our backend we have object oriented patterns. We pass this to TypeORM converts these into SQL, pass that SQL to specific driver, and that driver will obviously execute your queries and will provide you the results right over here. Okay, now obviously since we have one abstraction over our main clients, so what are the disadvantages which comes with that with that abstraction is obviously number one is obviously it is the learning curve of ORM. Obviously it is a time consuming. You need some time to get used to specific ORM. Obviously that's the reason why I'm creating this video. And the second one is obviously ORMs are generally slower than SQL, and not that much slower, but obviously that it is slower than your main clients. The obvious reason is because it's providing abstraction, and that abstraction is obviously object oriented one, so it takes some time to convert your object oriented classes to SQL. Okay, and that conversion obviously needs time. So that's why it is obviously slower as compared to clients, because in clients we are directly passing SQL, but in case of ORM we have to provide object oriented patterns or object oriented classes, and that classes will be converted back to SQL. So obviously that conversion will take some time. So that's why ORM is obviously slower as compared to SQL, plain SQL. Okay, so that's the concept over here, and these are the two main disadvantages which comes to ORM by default. Okay, so that's the overall concept of why we need ORM and what are the benefits, what are the disadvantages. Okay, so now let's get to the main topic, which is obviously our TypeORM. And for getting started with TypeORM, it's simple. You need three main dependencies. One of one is TypeORM, second one is reflect metadata, and the third one is obviously the client of the database which you want to use. Okay, since we will be working with Postgres, so we need that PG client. Okay, so again, if you go to this diagram, we need PG client, we need TypeORM, and one additional dependency, which is our reflect metadata. Okay, and apart from this, we also need some development dependencies, which are the type definitions of node. Okay, and since TypeORM, the recommended approach is to use TypeORM with TypeScript. Although you guys can use with JavaScript, but the recommended approach is to use it with TypeScript, and obviously I will use TypeScript with this TypeORM thing. Okay. And obviously, if you want to use any other database, so you guys can go to the official documentation of typeorm.io, which is this one. And here you can scroll down. If you scroll down, you guys can see the installation process. Again, you need TypeORM, you need reflect metadata, and you need to again install the type definitions of node. And again, depending on your database, you guys can use this MySQL driver for MySQL or MariaDB. You can use Postgres. For Postgres, you guys can use PG, and for SQL add this thing. Again, it depends on what database you want to use. For each and every database, there is a client available right over here. Okay, so you guys can see that. So that's the overall concept of installing things for working with TypeORM. And obviously I will be working with Express, especially because although Express has nothing to do with TypeORM, but since whenever we want to make a backend application, we need some sort of an HTTP server which will serve our REST endpoints. So for that, obviously, we need Express. Okay, so that's why I will be using TypeORM with Express. Again, it's not a part of TypeORM; it's a separate thing. But obviously, in our real-world scenarios, we need some of the REST endpoints. So for that, we need Express. Okay, so we'll be working with Express, and we will be setting our this TypeORM thing with our project. Okay, so I think that's the overall concept of our theory for now, and as we proceed further we will come to this markdown and we'll study our concepts one by one. Okay, so for now let's jump to our practical demonstration. Okay, so let's jump to the practical demonstration, and right now you can see that I've opened my VS Code and I have opened a simple directory which is having type name as TypeORM Crash Course. Okay, so it's empty folder for now. So let's start the proceedings. So let me just open my integrated terminal, and obviously the very first thing we have to do is to initialize our package.json file. So npm init-y, because I want to go with the default options. So this will create our very first package.json file right in my folder structure. Okay, so let's clear the terminal, and now obviously we need some of our main dependencies to get start with the proceedings. So let me install, obviously I will be needing Express because I need you guys to know how to work with TypeORM, especially in context of Express, which will help you to build the backend applications. Okay, so we need Express, we need TypeORM, obviously we need reflect metadata. So reflect reflect metadata, we need this one. And obviously since we are working with Postgres, so we will be needing our Postgres client, which is this pg. Okay, and these are, I think, all the main dependencies which we require for now. Okay, so let me just press enter and this will go and fetch all the dependencies. Okay, okay, so here you can see that our dependencies has been installed, and if I somehow hide my terminal and go to my package.json file, you guys can see that I'm having these dependencies right in my application. Okay, so let's open our integrated terminal, and right now since we will be working with TypeScript, so we need some development dependencies as well. So npm install dash dash save dash dev, and some development dependencies which include, obviously we need some type definitions of a node, and this type definitions of node is recommended if you guys are working with TypeORM. Okay, and second, obviously we need TypeScript, and we need ts-node, and we obviously need a not bound. Okay, so we need TypeScript obviously because we will be working with TypeScript, and second is ts-node, which will just help us to run our TypeScript file without converting them to JS. Obviously, yeah, it does convert them JS, but it does that behind the scenes. Okay, and obviously the third one is, obviously the last one is nodmon, which will help us to uh, help us not to refresh our server, because it does watches our files and automatically refresh our server. Okay, so that's the overall development dependencies we need for now. So let's enter this thing, so it will go on and will install all these development dependencies in our package.json file. Okay, okay, so here we are done. So let's hide our integrated terminal, and here you can see that our development dependencies are installed. We are having our type definitions of node, we are having a nodmon, we have ts node, and we are having TypeScript. Okay, so for now these are development dependencies because we don't ship them with the production. Okay, so these are just for improving our development experience. Okay, so I think I have missed one dependency, which are the type definitions for Express. Since we will be working with TypeScript, so we also need type definitions of Express. So let me just go and install our type definitions of Express as well. Okay, so yeah, there you go. So it has been installed, and right now you can see we are also having our type definitions. Okay, okay, so for working with TypeScript, the very first thing you guys need is obviously the tsconfig.json file, and so for that you guys can have to initiate our tsconfig file, and for that you guys can use the development package of TypeScript. Okay, so let's say npm, not npm, we will use npx, and then we will invoke the TypeScript compiler, and dash dash init is the parameter which will initiate that tsconfig.json file. Okay, so here you can see that tsconfig.json has been created with these parameters. Okay, so let's clear our screen. Let's go to this tsconfig.json. Okay, so right now here I will change some parameters which will be again according to our project. So let's first find our root directory, and root directory is again the place where you want to keep all of your TypeScript. So I will keep my root directory as source, and same as root directory we will be having our out directory. So let's search for out directory, and out directory will be the place where all the compiled JavaScript will go. Okay, so let's make it to something like dist. Okay, now some developers usually like to make it prod for production, but I keep it as like dist. Okay, so let's save this thing, and that's the only two options right now we need. uh, so uh, let's just close this thing away for now. So let's create our folder, because since we will be keeping our file inside our source folder, so I will keep it source. We'll create the source folder right over here, and obviously we will not be creating our dist folder. That's the responsibility of TypeScript compiler, to create the dist folder and put all the compiled JavaScript in that folder. So let's me right click new file, and I will create my very first file, that will be app.ts. Okay, and here I will create a simple express application. So let's import express from express, and obviously we will create an instance of express. So let's app express, and after that obviously we will just define a get route, which will just simple request and response. It will be having a parameter of request and response, and after that we will just send response dot send, and then we will just type hello world for now. Okay, so hello world. Okay, so that's our express application. And now since we are using TypeScript, so obviously you should have to take the complete benefit of that. So we will import request and response types from our express package as well, and we will define it right over here. So request and obviously response over here. Okay, so after defining the endpoint, the only thing you have to do is to start the server. So it's app.listen, and we will start at port 3000. So let's say for now I will keep the port over here. So const let's define the port equal to 3000. Okay, and we will define the port here as well, and it will give us also the second parameter is obviously callback function, which will run when the server will start. Okay, so I will just simple log here that server, let's go with a backtick string, and let's say server has started on port, and inside our dollar and curly brackets we will place the port. Okay, so that's our simple express server. Let's save this thing. Let's open our interior terminal, and now obviously for running this project we need to define some of commands, or you guys can say some of scripts in our package.json file. Okay, so the very first script I want is obviously we will run in our is a development environment. So I will name it as like dev, and then we will use our nodemon package, and this nodemon package will go inside our source folder, and inside source it will run our app.ts file. Okay, so now obviously for running the TypeScript file we will need a ts node, and that ts node is already installed as a development dependency. Okay, so nodemon will uses ts node for running this file, which is app.ts. Okay, so we also need another script, and which is to build, and this build script will obviously compile all the TypeScript to JavaScript, and for that we will use this tsc command, which is TypeScript compiler. So whenever you type tsc, it will automatically look for the tsconfig.json file, and based on these compiler parameters it will go out and will compile all the TypeScript to JavaScript. Okay, so that's the build command, and the start command will obviously start your application in production mode. So we know that whenever we compile our project, it will go into dist folder, and inside dist folder this app.ts will be converted to app.js. So I can use node, and I can go to our inside our dist folder we can run app.js. So that's the overall command. So I think we are done with this. So now let's open our app.ts, and let's open integrated terminal, and if I type npm run dev, so it will you can see that nodemon will go source app.ts. It is behind the scene, it is using ts node for running our app.ts file, and you can see we are having that log that our server is up on port 3000. Okay, so if I let's say open our Google Chrome, and if I go to localhost 3000, you can see the endpoint which we have defined is returning our string, which is hello world. Okay, so this means that everything is working fine till now. Okay, so let me just close this thing for now. Let me clear the screen. And the very next step we have to do is to obviously build for our production, in which we will compile all of our TypeScript to JavaScript. Okay, so for that you have to type npm run build, and this is the same script which we have defined, okay, right over here, which is this build script. Okay, so when you will run this script, it will obviously compile all the TypeScript to JavaScript, and here you can see that it has created our dist folder, and inside this folder you can see we are having our app.js. So it is compiling our app.ts to app.js, and this is our obviously production folder. So you guys can run this with the help of this start script right over here, which will again use node, and it will go inside our dist folder and it will run app.js. So if I type npm run start, so it will start production, and you can see that server is started on port 3000. And if I go to my browser, let's open Google Chrome, and if I refresh this thing, you can see I'm still getting the same result. Okay, so that's the overall concept of configuring our project. Right now we have just configured TypeScript with our Express, and we have tested our endpoint right over here. Okay, we have also made a build for production as well. So right now there is no involvement of TypeORM. So since we are working with TypeORM, so let's start the proceedings by implementing TypeORM in our application. Okay, so before implementing TypeORM, the very first thing you have to do is to obviously install Postgres. Now obviously it depends on you guys that whether you want to use Postgres locally, or you guys want to set somewhere in the production or somewhere in the cloud. Okay, so for now I have already installed Postgres in my local system. So if I open Postgres right over here, you can see that I've already installed Postgres in my computer locally. Obviously I will not go through the setup that how you guys can install Postgres. You guys can find a lot of content of how to install Postgres database in your local computer on YouTube as well, or you guys can find any blog if you like. Okay, so I've already installed Postgres, so let's start with the TypeORM thing. Okay, so for this, let's go to our Google Chrome, and let's fetch our official docs, and that is typeorm.io. These are the official documentation of TypeORM, which will tell you how to integrate TypeORM. Okay, so the very first thing obviously to require or to install all the dependencies which we have done right now, TypeORM, reflect metadata, and all those stuff. Okay, for now. Okay, and for quick start, so let's go to at the top side, and the very first thing you have to do is to create your data source. Okay, so working with data source, so that's the concept. Okay, and I have also created some notes regarding the working with the data source. So let me just come to my markdown, or let's just open our markdown for now. So I'm using Obsidian, and let's open here. Okay, so for right now you can see that if I scroll down to where we left before, so we have installed all of our dependencies right now, and the first step after you install all those stuff is to configure your data source. Okay, now data source is the point where you provide your database parameters to TypeORM. That where is our database is located, which is the host, what is the port, what is the username and password, and based on these parameters our TypeORM will connect to our database. Okay, so this is the code right over here, and after you connect your data source with your database, you guys can start the proceedings. Okay, so let's without time wasting, let's come to our VS Code, and the very first thing you have to do is to import our reflect metadata. Okay, so let's import reflect metadata. Okay, so importing reflect metadata at your entry point of application is a must, and this is also mentioned when you go to getting started guide, and if you scroll down you can see that it is saying you to install reflect metadata and import it somewhere in the global place of your app, for example app.ts. Okay, so at the starting point of your application, which is your entry point, you have to import this reflect metadata. Okay, so once you import that thing, the very next thing you have to do is to create your data source. And obviously you guys can create the data source in the same file, but it's good to use the concept of separation of concerns. So we will make it into a separate folder. Let's create a folder, and for now I will call it as data source. Okay, for now. Okay, so in this folder we will create our data source, and let's create a file something like data source.ts. Okay, so it will be our data source. Let me just make it camel case. Okay, so it's data source.ts. Okay, so here obviously you need to import data source, and that will be imported obviously from TypeORM, and after that you need to create an instance of that data source. So I will name it, it's something like data source, and let's equal to we will to create a new object of the data source, and inside this new object, inside this new object constructor, you have to pass the parameters which are specific to your database. Okay, so the very first thing you have to do is to define the type, that which type of database you want to use. In our case we will be using Postgres, but if you remove this thing and open the IntelliSense, so you can see that we are having tons of options. Okay, so we are having MySQL, we are having MariaDB, CockroachDB, and all those databases right over here. Okay, since we will be using Postgres, so I will go with Postgres, and then we have to define our host. In our case my database is at localhost, so LOCL, it's localhost, it's running on localhost. The port is, in my case, is 5432, and obviously the username in my case is Postgres, and the password in my case is obviously for now I have not kept any password. Okay, so I will leave the password as empty. Okay, and obviously the last option is to provide the database name which you want to connect, and I have already created the database, which is test. Okay, so in my case the database name will be test, and these are, I think, all the parameters which are required for now. So by the help of these parameters we will obviously data source will go and connect to our database. Okay, and let's save this thing, and let's export default, and we will default export our data source. Okay, so right now you guys can initialize your data source right in this file as well, but I like to initialize my data source in my entry point of application. That's why I'm exporting this data source right from here. Okay, so let's come over here and let's import our data source. So let's import our data source, and you can see that data source has been imported right over here. Let's save this thing for now, and let's initialize our data source. So for that you have to just type data source dot initialize, and it the moment you call this function initialize, it will return you a promise, and that promise will have a .then and .catch. .then means that everything will be working fine, but if somehow the promise fails, so you guys can cache the error in your .catch function. Okay, right over here. Okay, so let's say if everything goes fine, we will say log success. Let's say we can call it data source successfully connected with the database. Okay, so let's say data source is successfully connected with the database, and if somehow it doesn't connect, so let's say we want to log something like data source connection, let's say failed, and after that we will just print out that error. Okay, so that's the overall concept. So let's just save this thing, and let's me just open my interior terminal, and let's start in development mode. So npm run dev. Okay, so let's enter this thing, and right now you can see it's running, and yeah, here you can see that server has started on port 3000, as well as our data source has been successfully connected with our database. That means that everything is working fine for now. Okay, so let's say if somehow you somehow make a mistake in your these parameters, so it will not run. Okay, so you guys will get error. So let's say if I want to make something like change the port to somewhere that in which the Postgres database is not running, so let me just save this thing, and you can see that it automatically restarts my server, and right now you can see that it is failing. Okay, so data source connection is failed, so it is saying that connection is getting refused at port 5431, and obviously that's the error. Okay, so let me just make it 5432, and it will again refresh my application, and you can see that it is again connected with my database. Okay, so that's the concept of connecting your TypeORM with your database. Okay, now one more thing I want to show is that in your data source you guys are having one more option, which is this logging. Okay, and logging is the option. If you make it to true, by default the logging is false. Okay, by default the logging is false, but if you guys make it to true, so you guys can see all the SQL being generated by this TypeORM module. Okay, so if I save this thing and I open my integrated terminal, you guys can see that it is again restarting, and now you can see that we are having some of the queries being run behind the scenes, which is select star from current schema and select version. Okay, so this is the SQL being generated behind the scenes, and that SQL is being generated with TypeORM, and right now you can see that we have not written any SQL query till now. Okay. So that's how you configure your data source in your project, okay, with the help of this TypeORM module. So let's go to Obsidian, and before getting further, I want to just discuss one more diagram, okay, so which is this working of TypeORM, okay, right over here you can see, okay. So let's assume, let me just make it zoom it more, okay, so I can't zoom further. So I hope you guys are seeing this diagram. Okay, so let's say this rectangle, white rectangle, is my TypeORM module, and inside the TypeORM module we are having a data source. Okay, and that data source will get your connection parameters right from this brown box right over here. Okay, so we have provided connection parameters to data source, and with that connection parameters, it will go and connect with your Postgres database. Okay, so right now we have done this part. We are done with connection parameters. We are done with data source, and that data source has been successfully connected with my Postgres database. Okay, so that part is done. Okay. The next part is obviously the entities. Now, what are entities and what entities has to do with TypeORM? That's the second concept which we want to learn. Okay, so that's the second concept. So let's get started with the concept of entities in TypeORM. So let's start with the concept of entities. Okay, so if you scroll up to my markdown, you guys can see entities right over here. Okay, so the very first concept was obviously configuring our data source. The second concept is entities in TypeORM. Okay, now entities is the concept which we were talking about. Okay, so this is entities. In simple words, you guys can say that it is the object oriented way to create tables in your database. Okay, so if you guys read the definition, so it is simply saying that entity is just a class that maps to a database table. Okay, and this is the concept which combines our object oriented world with our SQL. Okay, so it says that just provide this class to TypeORM, and TypeORM will read this class, and after reading this class it will convert it to something like this in your database. So you can see that we are having a class of user. Okay, and once we mark this with @entity decorators, and decorators are new to TypeScript, so this decorator tells TypeORM that yes, this class is an entity. Okay, and these decorators are obviously being imported from our TypeORM package. Okay, so once you define entity decorator, it will mark this class as a table, and it will name it with this class user keyword, and you can see the table is also named with as user. Okay, and then we are having 1, 2, 3, and 4 different properties right over here, which is ID, first name, last name, and is active. Okay, and you can see on ID we are having @primary generated column. This decorator marks your this property as primary key. Okay, so you can see that the same concept is being mapped in database. We are having an ID of type integer, and that is also a primary key and is auto incremented. Okay, and the next property is obviously your first name, last name, which are string here, and this string will automatically be detected by TypeORM, and TypeORM will make these properties as varchar in your database table right over here. Okay, and since is active is a boolean type, so it will mark boolean type in your database right over here. Okay, so with the help of these entities, you guys can easily map this concept, this object oriented concept, with the SQL concept by creating these tables. Okay, so this is the overall concept. So right now if you come to our diagram, so you can see that entities are the only thing which you have to make, and after creating your entities you have to provide these entities to your data source, and once your data source will get all these entities, it will create your database tables in your database, and then you can start working with it. Okay, so let's implement our second concept. Okay, so let me just come to our VS Code, and let's get back to our source directory, and inside our source directory I will create a new folder, and let's say that this is our entities. Okay, so I have created a new folder of entities, and I will keep all the entities in this folder right now. Okay, so let's right click and let's create a new file, and let's say we want to create an entity of user. Okay, so the convention for creating entity is that you have to make it capital. Okay, so the first word of entity must be capital. Okay, again it's not a must, but it's the best convention to use. Okay, so we can say user dot entity dot ts. Again I am naming it as dot entity is because I want to mention it as an entity. Okay, and again it's my personal preference, but it depends on you if you want to name it anything else. Okay, so once you make it user.entity.es, so here you can create your very first entity. So let's Let's, just for simplicity, let's copy that scenario, okay, from Obsidian. Okay, so let's copy this thing and let's paste it over here. Okay, so here you can see I have copied the code which I have explained right now. We are having entity, primary generated column, and the column decorator. These three decorators are being imported from TypeORM, and I have created the class right over here. Okay, so which I have already explained. So let's save this thing, and right now you can see that here I am having two different errors. Okay, number one is obviously the usage of decorators, and obviously once you are using decorators in TypeScript, so you have to enable those features in tsconfig.json file. Okay, so if you come to tsconfig.json file and search for decorators, so you are having these two properties: experimental decorators and emit decorators metadata. Okay, so you have to mark these both to true, because if you want to use decorators in TypeScript, you have to enable these two properties. Okay, again, it is also marked in the official documentation of TypeORM as well. Okay, so once you save this thing, you come over here, you can see that now the decorators are free and there is no error in our decorators. Okay, but the problem here is that we are having error on our property, and it is saying it has no initializer and is not defined or assigned in our constructor. Okay, so if any property you have created in a class and you have not assigned that property a value in your constructor, so it will give you an error. Okay, so for resolving this, you have to just come over here and you have to find property initialization. Okay, strict property initialization. So this is the property. By default it is true. So in our case, because we don't need it because we are working with entities, so I will make it false. So once you make it false, the error will go away. Okay, and you will have your clean entity class right over here. Okay, so that's it. So that's the properties which you want to configure in tsconfig.json file for working with entities. Okay, so once you have created your entities, the very next concept is obviously, if you look at the diagram, we have to register our entities in our data source. Okay, so let's go to our data source and let's import our entity right over here. So I will be importing user, and it is being imported from our entities to user.entity. And for registering entities in your data source, we have an entities option, and it will accept an array, and this array will be having all the entities which you are working with in your project. Okay, since in our case we are having only one entity which is user, so I will register user right over here. Okay, so once you save this thing, let's open our integrated terminal and let's npm run dev. Let's run our application in development mode. So here you can see that our application is started. So here you can see that we are having some SQL right over here. Okay, and it is saying data source is also connected to the database. So let's open our database and let's see that what tables are there. Okay, so let's open our data grip. Again, I'm using data grip here for working with database. You guys can use any open source tool you wish to have. Okay, but since I love to work with data grip, so I'm using data grip in my scenario. Okay, so yeah, right now you can see that I am having a clean public schema and there are no tables involved in it. Okay, so if I refresh this thing, there is nothing not a single table right now in my application. Okay, so if I, let's say, so if I somehow come to my VS Code, right now you can see that I have created my entities, I have registered my entities in my data source, and somehow if I want to tell data source that go and make a table of this entity which has been registered, so for that you have to enable one more option which is called synchronization. Okay, so synchronization, if I mark, by default synchronization is equal to false, but when you make it synchronization to true, so once you make it true, so what it will do is it will sync your complete database with these entities right over here. Okay, in simple words, it will go and convert all your entities to database tables in your database. So once you save this thing, open your integrated terminal, so you have some queries right over here, okay, which are being generated behind the scenes by TypeORM. And if you come over here, you can see this query right over here, because I create table user ID, first name, last name, is active, and a constant of primary key which is your ID. So this SQL is being generated by default with TypeORM, okay, by just reading this entity which you have created right over here. And now if I come to my data grip and refresh this thing, and if I open my schema, so you can see I'm having one table of user, and if I open user, you guys can see that I'm having ID as our primary key, first name, last name, and is active. So in simple words, what entities have done here is it has taken your entity, TypeORM has received your entity in object oriented fashion and has converted your entity into a database table. So that's the concept of entities. So if I come back to my diagram, so we are done with this complete part of TypeORM right now. Okay, so we have provided connection parameters. With the help of that connection parameters, data source has been connected to our database, and then we have provided our entities, and with the help of that entities, data source has mapped those entities in as tables in our database. So that part is done. Okay, so once you register your entities, you need some way to interact with your database. Okay, let's say that this is a table and you want to save information, you want to update information in this table, you want to delete information. So for all those tasks, TypeORM, or you guys can say that this data source will provide you two different interfaces to work with that data. Okay, number one will be the repository and number two will be the query builder. Okay, so these are the two ways by which your backend application will interact with TypeORM and can manipulate data in your database. And these two patterns are a part of object oriented or functional programming. Okay, so we don't need to provide any SQL query in this case. So the next concept here is to use repository and query builder to interact with your database. So without wasting time, let's get started. Okay, so let's start working with the repository method. Okay, so I think repository is way more than you guys are expecting. It gives you very much all the functionalities which you require to interact with your tables. Okay, so most of the time we use repositories, but if you want to make some complex queries, so you guys can use the query builder of TypeORM. But first let's go with the repository one. Okay, so let's open our VS Code as well as our data grip. Okay, so it's side by side comparison to see how things are working. Okay, so since if I go to my user, we have defined our entity, and if I go to my data source, I have registered my entity right over here. Okay, so now let's say we want to interact with our entities, so we can interact with repositories. Okay, and we can get the repositories right from our data source which we have configured. Okay, so what I can do is I can interact with that data source in our endpoints, and this is the I think best way to teach you guys about TypeORM, because from this you can get that how we can create our REST APIs and can manipulate our database. So let's just remove this for now, only this send one. And right now we can say let repository, and let's say I'm creating a variable of user repo. Okay, and that is equal to data source and I'm having a method of get repository right over here. Okay, and inside this get repository method I have to define that of which entity repository is required. Okay, since I want to get the repository of user, so I will mark user right over here. Okay, so based on this user I have passed, this data source will give me the repository of that user entity. And after that, with the help of this user repository, the variable which I have received, I can uh, perform any type of action I want. Okay, so let's say I want to insert some data into my this user table with the help of this repository. Okay, so the very first thing we have to do is to create some information of user. So let's say I'm saying const user1 equal to new user, and after that let's say I'm saying user1 dot first name, let's say equal to afaq, and let's say user1 dot last name equals to, let's say, Javed, and let's say user1 dot I'm having is active and is active to true. Okay, and am I having any other property? Let's look. Okay, so I have defined ID, so not the ID but first name, last name, and is active. I've defined these three parameters. I don't need to define the ID because it will be automatically generated behind the scenes since it is a primary key. Okay, so let me just copy this and let's go to create another user. Let's say it's my user2, and let's make it something like Amir, and let's say Asad, and let's make it to user2 also. So it's user2, and let's create one more user. Okay, so let's say it's user3 for now, and let me just mark it as user3 for now. And let's say this user3 is obviously someone maybe like Javed, and let's say make it Javed Asad for now. Okay, so let's say we are having three different users and I want to save these three users information in my database table. So with that I can use this repository and can do that. Okay, so let's say I can say user repo, and if I say user report dot, so I am having a method of save. Okay, so this method of save is coming from our repository, and inside this save method you can see that we can pass many entities if we want, or if we want we can pass single entities as well. Okay, so since we are having three different entities right over here, so I will pass these three entities in an array which will be having user 1, user 2 and user 3. Okay, so once you provide these three entities in your save method, it will if you hover over here you can see that it will return you that the list of that users as a promise. Okay, and those will be all the records which will be added in a database. So let me just send that back to res dot let's say JSON, and inside JSON we will pass this thing right over here. Okay, so it will automatically convert it into JSON. Okay, so let me move it back and let me just cut it over here and paste it over here. Okay, and since obviously you can see that it will return us a promise, so we need async await. So I will mark it something like async, and I will await, mark it await right over here. Okay, so it will await, it will save these three users and will return us a promise which will be having those three users, and we can see that in our when we fire this request right over here. Okay, so let's save this thing, and if I open my Thunder client, I can fire that request. So let's create a new request, and for now let's say let me just hide this thing, and let's say it's http forward slash localhost and my port is on 3000. Okay, so let's see that if my server is up. Okay, so our server is up right now. So let's go to request and let's fire this thing. Okay, so you can see that we are getting a 200 OK response. We are having three different records. Afaq Javed, which is having ID 1, and the second one is having ID 2, Asad Amir Asad, and the third one is having ID 3, Javed Asad. Okay, so these three records has been inserted in our database. So if I come and refresh our table, so where is the refresh button? Right over here, you can see that these three records has been inserted in our database. So that's the power of ORM right from here. Okay. Okay, so let's say once we have inserted our users, so let's find some users. Okay, so let's say I want to make something different right over here. So let's remove this thing, and let's say I want to find users. Okay, so finding all users, you guys can use user repo.find, and this find method will return you all the users which are inside your table, and then you can use await, and we can send it as a JSON response right over here. Okay, so that's the overall concept. So we are finding all the users, and if somehow if I save this thing and if I go to Thunder client and this new request, and if I fire this thing, you can see that still we are getting these three users, ID1, ID2 and ID3. Okay, so let's say if I'm having a scenario that I don't want all the parameters, but I want some selective parameters which includes first name and last name. So I can pass an object inside this find query, and I can select that parameter, and inside select it will give me intelligence. Okay, so you can see that's the power of TypeORM. So let's say I only want first name, and I want, okay, so I think its select is an array. Okay, so let me remove this thing. So select is an array in which you can pass first name as well as last name. Okay, so it is giving you intelligence as well. So what this query will do is, if I save this thing and if I go to again fire this request, okay, so let's see that what went wrong. Okay, so everything is working fine for now. Let's send the request again. Okay, so I think at that point the server was restarting. So let's say you can see that we are only now having first name, last name, first name, last name of all three users. Okay, so let's say this time I don't want first name, but I want first name with ID. Let's save this thing and let's wait for our server to refresh. So it's refreshed, and now if I fire the same request, I will get first name with ID. So ID and first name. Okay, so that's the power of an ORM. Okay, so again you guys can fire different options inside this. For that you have to go to the official documentation of TypeORM, and inside this obviously you guys can go in find options right over here, and inside this you will find all the options which you can find in that query. Okay, So we have tried this one, select. Okay, this is one of the ways in which you can do, but since we were passing it as an array, it was working. And if you're working with relations, you can pass relations right over here. Obviously we will come to relations in coming on section. Okay, so let's say if you want to order something, so you can also use order. It's like a order and id or something like this. So let's say if I want, I will just remove this thing, and let's say I want order, and inside order I want the id to be in, let's say, descending. Okay, so it's descending. So let's save this thing and let's try out something in our Thunder client. So let's fire the request, and now you can see we are getting the opposite. With id3 is coming first, then we are having id2, and then we are having id1. Okay, so this is how you work with the repository pattern. Okay, so let's say now we change the scenario, and let's say I want to delete some of the records in my this table. Okay, so for that, obviously let me just comment this thing out, and let's go over here. And let's say now I want the user repository to delete a record. Okay, so for deleting, obviously by default you can pass any id if you want. Okay, since let's say I want to delete this user with id3, so I can directly pass id3 inside this. Okay, and if you hover this delete, it will just give you a promise of that deleted result. Okay, so let's say I am again using await right over here, and I am passing res.json as a response to this query. Okay, so let's save this thing, and let's go to our Thunder client, and let's fire this request. Okay, so I think at that point the server was restarting, so let me fire that again. So let's send it, and now you can see it is giving me a raw in an empty array and affected one means that there is only one row which has been affected. Okay, and if I come over here and I refresh this thing, so let me just refresh it. Now you can see that the third user which was having the id of 3 has been deleted. Okay, so that's how you delete records from your database. And obviously if you want to update, you can also update records with the help of this repository. So let's say I want user repository dot let's say I want to update something. So let's say update, and inside this update, obviously you need some criteria first, and let's say our criteria is that we want to update our id user with id2, and we want their, let's say, their first name. Let's say first name is Amir, but I want the first name to be, let's say, Qureshi. Okay, so let's the first name should be Qureshi. So what this will do is it will go and find the record with id2 and will update the first name to Qureshi. Okay, so let me just if you hover this update, it will return you a promise as well. So let's see that what promise looks like. So let me pass await over here, and I will send that as a JSON response. Okay, so let me just make it one more. So let's save this thing, and now if somehow I come over here to our Thunder client, and if I send the request, so let's first see that if our server is up. Okay, server is up, and now let's send the request, and now you can see that it is saying affected one. That means that one row has been affected. So if I come over here and refresh this thing, now you can see that the first name has been changed to Qureshi. Okay, so that's the overall concept of repositories, how we interact with the repositories and how we manipulate data in our database. Now obviously there is more to it. I cannot cover each and every concept in this crash course, but I would suggest you guys I will suggest you guys to go to the documentation and start working with the repository, find it, and then inside our find options, go and see that how and what type of queries you guys can run. Okay, with these with this repository pattern. Okay, so that's the concept of repositories. Okay, so now if I go to my Obsidian diagram, so you can see that obviously we are done with this repository part, and the second part is obviously the query builder. And I will not be touching query builder for now, because we will touch query builder when we will be working with relations. But now I think it's the best time to get started with the relations. Okay, so because obviously TypeORM work with relational databases, and relations are the only concept which help us to create these complex applications. Okay, so now I think it's the time to see that how we can work with the relations, especially in the context of these entities. So let's get started. But working with the concept of relations. Okay, So if you scroll down, I've already created my markdown regarding relations. Now, before you start with relations, there are these five concepts which you must know while working with relations, and these five concepts already exist with any relation, whether it is one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. Again, I will not be explaining that what one-to-one and one-to-many and many-to-many relation is. That's the part of the relational database systems. So you must know those concepts. I will only try to explain that how you guys can map those relations with TypeORM. Okay. So with relations, we will be having cascade, on delete, eager, and lazy relations. We will understand our nullable relations and two-way relations. Okay. So let's start with our very first relation. Okay. So let's say it's one-to-one, and let's say we are having a users table, obviously for now, and that user can only create one profile. Okay, so it's obvious that on any of the web application or in any business use case, one user can create only one profile. Okay, so it's not a case in which one users can have many profiles. So it's strictly a one-to-one relation in which we will be having a users table with these attributes right over here: first name, last name, and active. And then we will be having a profile table which will be having the gender and obviously the skills which he will add in his profile. Okay, so let's start mapping this scenario right over here. Okay, so let me just open my VS Code for now, and let's open data grip on side by side. Okay, so let's say we want to create our user entity, and for now we know that we are already having our user entity right now, but since we need our profile, because we have discussed that we need a profile entity as well. Okay, so let's create a new file. So let me just open my file explorer, and let's go to file, and let's say inside our entities folder I will right click and will create a new file, and let's say it's profile dot entity.ts. Okay, so this will be our profile, and let's just copy for now from our user entity, and let's paste it right over here. Okay, and let me hide my this file explorer, and let's start the proceedings. So let's say for now I want to name this as profile, because since we will be creating our profile entity, and obviously the profile will also have our primary key, then the profile will have our gender. So let's say it's gender, and let's say the profile will also have a particular skill, and that skill is also of a string type. Okay, you guys can add further parameters if you want, but I'm keeping it as simple. Okay, so let's say this is our profile entity and it's ready to go for now, but here I want to tweak some of the parameters which we have not touched yet. Okay, so let's say if I want to change the table name which is being created by TypeORM in our database, so I can come inside its entity and I can pass the name right over here. Okay, so let's say I want the table name to be started with capital P, so it will be profile for now. Okay, so let's say this is the name which will be accepted by TypeORM, and then TypeORM will convert this entity to a database name, to a database table with this name right over here. Okay, so let's save this thing, and let's say in our column I want to define some more attributes. Okay, so let's say we need a gender, obviously, so the gender cannot be nullable, so I will make it nullable false. That means that the gender is a must, it is required. Okay, it can't be null. Okay, so that's one thing. And let's say in our skill we say that it can be nullable. Okay, so let's say it's nullable to true. That means that obviously it doesn't always have to, any user doesn't have to have a skill. Okay, so we can mark that as nullable to true. Okay, so that's the concept right over here. So let's save this thing for now, and let's register our this entity in our data source. So let's open our data source, and let's import our profile right over here. So let's import our profile. So that has been imported from our entities, and let's register our profile right over here. Okay, so let's profile, and let's save this thing. Let's open our integrated terminal, and let's start our application in development mode. Now since we know that synchronization is true, so it will automatically go and create our profile table. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, right over here you can see that there is a ton of SQL being generated by TypeORM, and if you see on this query, so it is creating our table profile with ID, gender, skill, and our primary key as ID. Okay, so if I somehow open my data grip, and let's open our database, and let's go to let's refresh this thing, and now you can see that the profile table has been created. And now you can see the difference that this profile table is having the same name which is provided right over here. Okay, so let me open this profile table and let me just collapse this thing, and now you can see that the profile table is generated with ID, gender and skill. Okay, so right now if you look at to my markup, we have users table, we have profile table. Okay, but since we want to create a relation between these two entities, we have not done that step yet. Okay, so let's implement that step. So let's say I want to open again my VS Code and a data grip, and this is side by side. Let's hide it, and let's say we know that our user will be having one profile. Okay, so let's say I want to create our profile right over here. So there will be a property of profile which will be of type profile right over here. Okay, so this is a property of profile. So let's say we know that each user will be having a profile. So that's the attribute which we have created. Now for telling TypeORM that yes, there is a property of profile and we need to link it with our profile table, we need some decorators, and that decorator is obviously one-to-one. This is one-to-one decorator which will define our one-to-one relationship, and again it will be imported from our TypeORM. And there is one more decorator which will define our foreign key, and that is join column. Okay, so these are the two decorators required to map our one-to-one relation. Okay, so let's say the very first is obviously we will use @one-to-one decorator. So it's one-to-one, and inside this one-to-one decorator we have to define that with which table or with which entity we want to make the relation. Since we know that we want to create a relation with our profile table, so we will pass an arrow function, and that arrow function will return our profile entity class. Okay, so this will tell this one-to-one decorator that yeah, we need to create a one-to-one relation with our profile. Okay, so once the relation is configured, we want to mark this attribute profile as our foreign key. So for marking this attribute as a foreign key, we need to use @join column decorator. Okay, so that's the overall concept of creating relations which is specifically one-to-one relation with our entities. So let's save this thing, and for now if you open your this console, you can see some of the queries being generated by default on TypeORM. Okay, so you can see that there are 1, 2 and 3 queries being generated in which we are making the we are altering the table user profile ID is making to integer, and then we are also adding a constraint of something with our profile ID, and we are also altering the table of user, and we are adding a constant of foreign key with which will reference to our profile ID right over here. Okay, so again this is SQL, and this is automatically being generated behind the scenes with TypeORM. Okay, so once you save this thing, you can see right over here, and if I refresh something in my data graph, you can see that one column has been added with the name of profile ID. Now this column right over here will be acting as a foreign key which will reference to your profile table right over here. Okay, so that's how you create a one-to-one relation in your TypeORM. Okay, so now the very next thing we have to do is to obviously perform some of the operations with this relation, and for that we obviously need our repository pattern. Okay, so let's say let's delete all of our users for now. Okay, so now here you can see that I have deleted all of my users, as well as for now there is no profile existing in our database. Okay, so we are having empty users as well as empty profiles. So let's go to our main entry point, which is app.ts, and right over here we can start performing operations on our this relation which we have recently created. Okay, so let's remove everything for now, and let's just say rest.json, and inside this we will be providing our result. Okay, so let's say the very first thing we have to do is to create our repository. So let's say we will get our first profile repository. So let's say profile repo, that is equal to data source. We will go data source, and then we will get the repository of our profile. Okay, and for getting the repository of profile, we will pass the profile class right over here. Okay, so once we get our profile repo, let's copy this thing and paste it over here, and I will name it to something like user repo, because we will also be working with user. So, and here I have to pass user. Okay, so that's getting the repository. So now once you get your repository, the very first thing we have to do is to create our profile, and then we will use that profile and save it in our user repository. So let's say I'm creating our profile. Let's say it's our profile, that is equals to new profile. And let's say for now the profile dot gender, that is equals to, let's say it's a male. And let's say profile dot skill is obviously maybe something like a photo editor. Okay, so that's your skill. And let's say I want to save my profile. Now obviously we know that we can save the profile by using our profile repository, so it will return us that saved profile as well. So let's say let our saved profile, that is equals to profile repository and dot save, and sorry, it's profile repository dot save, and inside save we will pass this profile right over here. Okay, so let me pass this profile. So once this record will be saved, it will be returned into this save profile one. Okay, so let me just await it here because it is an asynchronous operation, and obviously while working with the repository, every operation you perform in your database will be asynchronous. Okay, so let's await for that thing. So once we save our profile, we can now append this profile into our user, which we will now create. Okay, so let's say let user equals to new user, and once we create our user, so we can say that user dot first name for now is, let's say, Afaq, and let's say user dot last name, that is equals to Javed, and user dot active is obviously equal to true. Okay, so we have created our user, and now since we know that each user is linked with profile, so we can come over here and now we can say that user dot profile is equal to the profile which we have saved right over here. Okay, so we can say that saved profile right over here. Okay, so since we have appended our profile, now we can go and save our user. So we can say that let's say let saved user is equal to we can say await for the operation, and then we can say that user repo dot save, and we will save our user. Okay, so that's the concept of saving our user. Okay, so once we save that user, we know that we are appending the profile, so it will automatically go and link the profile with that specific user. Okay, so let's return this saved user in our JSON so to see that what we are getting. Okay, so let me just make it short, and let's save this thing, and let's go to into our terminal, and let's see that if everything is working fine. Okay, so everything is working fine. Let's add a terminal, let's go to new request, and let's fire this thing. Okay, so if I click send, you can see that we are getting our first name as Afaq, last name is Javed, is active is true, and this user object is having a profile object right over here, which is having a gender of male, a skill of photo editor, ID of 1, and this ID of 4 is specifically of the user. Okay, since we have already added a ton of users while working with the repository, so that's why it is assigning the next ID, which is a 4 obviously. Okay, and if you come into our user, and if you, let's say, refresh this thing, you can see that ID 4 Afaq Javed, and the profile ID is 1, and this profile ID is working as a foreign key for this profile right over here. So if you refresh this thing, you can see we're having a profile of male which is having a gender of male and skill of photo editor right over here, and this is having ID of 1, and you can see this ID is equal to this ID right over here, which is acting as our foreign key. Okay, so this is how you save the one-to-one relation in your database. Okay, now one problem here is that obviously first creating our profile and then somewhat saving that profile into user, and then saving that user is quite a lengthy process. Okay, so let's say if you want to make things simple, so let's say we will be having just the user, and inside that user object we want to save our profile. So how can we do that? Okay, so let's say for now I don't need this profile repository, so I will be commenting it like this. Okay, so once you comment this thing, I also don't need this thing. Okay, and somewhat I want this user profile to be directly equal to somewhat, let's say, gender, which is obviously male, and let's say we will be having somewhat maybe like okay, so let's change this thing. Okay, let's say I want to uncomment this thing right over here, and let's say that is equal to the profile which we have created. Okay, so let's make it more simple. Okay, so let's say for now we don't need our user repository. I will remove all those things. So let's say we are just creating our profile, we are appending our profile, and we are not saving that profile in our database. I want that profile to be directly appended to our user object, and I want that whenever we add that user, the TypeORM must go with the responsibility to check that if it is having a profile, so it should also insert the specific profile in that in that database, okay, in that table. So how can we do that? So if somehow, let's say I want to change this to maybe something like female, and let's change some things, okay. So it's female, and let's say I want the skill to be, let's say, video editor, okay, and let's change something to maybe something like Sarah, and let's make it something like Sarah Jamshed, okay, and it's active and it's having this profile right over here, okay. So for now, if you save this thing, and let's say if I open my console, you can see our application is restarting, everything is working fine. But now if somehow you go and fire this request, so you can see that connection was forcibly closed by the pair, and this is the reason, because we must be having some error. So if I open my console, you can see that we are having an error, and this error is stating something like that update values missing error, okay. So it is saying cannot perform update query because update values are not defined, okay. Now this error doesn't give you so much hint that what is going wrong here, but I'm here to explain that what is going wrong, okay. So let's say if you make something like this, and you are appending the profile without saving the profile before, and you are directly appending it with the user, so that makes TypeORM confused that where this profile is, okay. So since it will go and look for the profile, and that profile is obviously not has been saved in database, so it will give you an error. So in that case, you can use a concept called cascading. Okay, so if I go to my Obsidian, you can see right over here, which is having cascade. Now cascade can be implemented for insert and update for both the scenarios. Right now I will go and implement cascading. So for enabling cascading in your application, what you can do is you have to just go to user entity, and inside this relation you have to define that we want to enable a cascade. So we can say that cascade, sorry, it will be an object, and inside that object we can say that cascade is equal to true, okay. So now what this will do is that this will tell TypeORM that whenever there is a profile information being appended in the user object, just go and create that record automatically without looking for that record, okay. So it will go and create that record whenever you enable cascade to true. So if I save this thing, and let's go to our app.ts, let's open our integrated terminal, so you can see that our application is restarting. And now once it has been restarted, I'm not changing the code, I'm just going and hitting the request. So once you send, you can see that now everything is working fine. We are having 200 okay, and we are having our first name as Sarah Jamshed, and then we are having the profile of female and video editor, okay. So if you can see that everything is working fine for now, and you can see that changes in your database. If I refresh this thing, you can see we are having a Sarah with ID 6, as well as if you go to profile and refresh this thing, so we will be having a profile of ID 2 with female and view editor. And if you come over here, so you can see the same ID being appended right over here, profile ID 2, which is linked with this profile right over here, okay. So you can see this is the power of cascading right from scratch, okay. So with help of cascading, you don't need to use a profile repository. You can directly append profile object with your main user, and it will go and directly insert that profile record into database, and will link that profile with your user object, okay. So that's one way of creating our record, which is having a one-to-one relation, okay. So that's the concept. So let's move on to something like, maybe let's comment this section and let's go down, okay. So let's say now we want to find our records, okay. So let's say we want to find all the users with their specific profiles, okay. So let's say we want our users. So let's say let all users, we create a variable, and let's await it, because obviously it's an asynchronous operation, and then we will use our user repository, and then we will use a find method, okay. And we know that since we don't pass any parameters in find, it will obviously go and get all the records, okay. So let's pass this to our response, and let's save this thing. Let's open our integrated terminal, and now you can see that we are not having any problems here. So let's hide this thing, and let's go to our new request, okay. So if somehow I fire this thing, so you can see that we are getting all the users, right. We are having first name, last name is Afaq Javed and Sarah Jamshed, and these are the two records which are being fetched from our database, okay. Nothing is wrong here, but the problem here is that we are getting the user, but we are not getting the attached profile which is attached with each user right over here, okay. So the linked profile which is linked with this user is not being fetched, okay. So the reason behind it is that we have not told this find to attach any relation with that. Okay, so for that what we can do is we can come over here, and inside an object we can find our relations, and inside these relations we can find an array, and inside this array we can provide with strings that which relation we want to bind. Okay, so let's say we want to bind the relation of profile. So let's go with profile right over there, and this keyword should be equal to the keyword which you have defined right over here. Okay, so this attribute name and this attribute name should be equal. So once you save this thing, what will happen is that this find query will find all the users specific to relations. Now whenever you define that relation, it will go and find the users with their specific relations. In our case, the relation is with our profile. Okay, so if you save this thing and if you open our integrated terminal, so you can see that everything is working fine for now. And if you fire that request, if you send this request, now you can see that we are getting our user with their specific profiles right from here. Okay, so this is one way of fetching your relations, and obviously you can perform any operations while joining these relations. Okay, you can do that. The second concept here I want to explain is that if somehow, let's say I don't want to pass any options and I want somehow to uh, load the relation automatically, and for that you have to define a property called eager. Okay, so that's the difference between eager and lazy relations. Okay, right over here you can see. So eager means that if you enable this option eager to true, it will automatically load the relations without defining. Okay, so let's say if I save this thing and if I come to user entity and it's a one-to-one relation, and if I come over here and I pass another option which is eager, and let's say I want eager to be true, and let's save this thing. Okay, so I have passed eager to true, and if I go to my this application, our main entry point, and you can see I'm not defining the relation here. Okay, so what will happen is it will automatically load the relation because we have enabled eager equal to true. Okay, so if you define eager equal to false, that will be equal to a lazy relation. Lazy relation means that you must have to tell to load the relation. Okay, but once you have eager to true, you don't have to tell the relation to be loaded, it will automatically load it for you. Okay, so if I make it to true, save this thing, and let's go to our entry point. Let's check if our application is being restarted. Okay, so yeah, it is restarted, and now if I go to our data grip, we are having the records, and if I go to our Thunder client, and now if I fire this thing, you can see that with users we are still getting our profile, and you can see that in our entry point I have not defined the relation. Okay, but since we know that we have enabled our eager option, it will automatically load the relation for us. Okay, so that's the concept of cascade and eager. Okay, so once you have found the relations, you can obviously perform different options over there. You can select different attributes, you can query different scenarios, so it depends on on you. Okay, so that's the overall concept. Okay, so for now we have understood the concept of finding our one-to-one relations as well as our saving one-to-one relations. So let's move on to our next concept, and for getting to our next concept, I've already cleared my data from our tables. So if you refresh my data grip tables, you can see that there is no data right now. Okay, so we will be starting right from scratch. So that next concept is obviously called let's open our OBSIDIAN, and that concept is called a two-way relation. Okay, now let's say that we know that somehow if you come to my this diagram, you know that from users we can access our profiles. Okay, so we can get users with respect to profile. Okay, so we are going from left to right. Now let's say somehow I want a scenario in which I need profile with their specific user, so I want to go from right to left. So how I can do that? Okay, and that concept is obviously called the two-way relation. Okay, it is called two-way because we need to go from left to right as well as from right to left. Okay, so let's scatter that scenario. So let's open our VS Code as well as our data grip, and let's come to our user entity. Okay, now for defining two-way relations, you need to be more specific. Okay, and for being more specific is you have to define some extra information in your one-to-one column. Okay, in this one-to-one decorator. Okay, so let's say I'm having one more information in which I have to specify that this one-to-one relation is being linked with which attribute of profile, and I know that that attribute is obviously of type user. Now let's say for going right to left, the very first thing, let's make it more simple. So let's say I am having a user right over here. Okay, and let's say that is user. Okay, now since I will have a user inside our profile entity, so I can easily go from right to left. From profile we can get the user. Okay, so that's the concept. So what I can do is I can simply go and tell to our user entity that right now I'm having one attribute inside profile, and go and link with that attribute, which is user. Okay, profile, and we will return profile dot user. Okay, so right now this might sounds confusing, but what I have done is I have first defined that this one-to-one relation is with which entity. In our case it is profile. Okay, now at the second step I've defined that, yeah, TypeORM knows that it is one-to-one relation with profile, but it is specifically wants to know that with which attribute of profile this relation is being made, and this relation is being made with the attribute of profile dot user, which is this one right over here. Okay, so now it will go and make a relation with that specific property only. Okay, and this is the benefit, because since we get profile right over here, so we can easily mark from right to left, and we can repeat the same scenarios with copying this decorator. So if I copy this thing, this one, and let's make it over here. Okay, so let's import our decorator. So let's now we know that this profile is being linked with not our profile, but it will be linked with our user, and specifically it will be linked with the user property of user dot profile. Okay, and for now I will just remove these options to make it sound simple. Okay, so this is the whole concept of creating two-way relations. Okay, now I know at the start it will sound a little bit confusing, but once you practice this concept, you will become used to it. Okay, so one of the best ways to check that if you have mapped a two-way relation correctly is to click on this one. It will take you back to profile, and when you click in profile.user, it will take to user. Okay, so it's profile here, it's user here. It will take you two-way. Okay, so that's the whole concept of creating a two-way relation. Okay, in our user, you can see that we have said that, yeah, you are having a relation with profile, and specifically with the attribute of profile dot user. So if you go to user, I have defined that yes, you are having a relation with your profile is having a relation with user, and specifically with the users of attribute user dot profile. It will take you back to the profile. Okay, and now if you save this thing, you are ready to go. Okay, because now you have defined a two-way relation easily. Okay, so if I open my integrate terminal, you can see there is no scenario and no error right over here. And if you come to our database, you will not see any changes for right now. You can see just I've defined our profile ID, which is just our foreign key, which is referencing to our profile, and inside profile you can see we are having nothing for now. Okay, but the benefit of creating two-way relation is obviously you can go from right to left as well as left to right. So let's scatter a scenario. So let's say in our app.ts, I'm having a user repository, and let's create a record. Okay, so let's for now uncomment this thing and comment this thing, and let's return our saved user. Okay, so let's save this thing. Let's see our application restarts, and in this obviously we are just creating a profile, and we are appending that profile with the specific user. Okay, so let's hit our request. So let's open our request, let's hide this thing, and let's hit it. Okay, now you can see we're getting a response of 200. Okay, and if I hide my terminal, you can see that I'm having our user object with our specific profile object. Okay, and if you come over here, you can, if you want to refresh this thing, so if you refresh this thing, you can see I'm having one record of user which is having a profile ID of 2, and if you go to our profile, refresh this thing, you can see we are having the same profile right over here. Okay, so for now, let's say we will be going from first left to right. Okay, so since we know we are going from our left to right, and left to right means that we will be going from user to profile. Okay, so for that what we can do is we can just uncomment this thing, because since we want to go from user to profiles, we'll be using our user repository. Okay, and since we know that user repository dot find, and inside find obviously you can pass the relation, but since I've already marked eager to true, so I don't have to do that. Okay, so let's just pass this down to our all users, and let's comment this thing. Okay, so for now we have added our record, so we don't need this line. So let's save this thing and let's see if everything is working fine. Yeah, our server is restarted. Let's hit the request. And now you can see that we are getting our user with our specific profile right over here. Okay, so that's the overall concept of going from left to right. Okay, so let's say now I want to change the scenario. Okay, I don't need this user repository, but I want to go from right to left. Okay, so for that I will just copy this thing, paste it over here and comment this thing. And now let's say we will go with profile repo. Okay, profile repo, and let's mark it as profile. And let's say with the help of this profile repo, I want all the profiles with their specific users. Okay, so let's say this all users will be equal to all profiles, and I will mark profile repo here, and then we will find. Okay, now since if you see in our profile repository dot find, you can see in our profile entity I have not marked this relation as eager for now. Okay, so what we can do is we have to tell specifically to our profile repository that we want our relation of users. So we can define inside relations, and inside relations, inside an array in string, I can define our user relation. Okay, and make sure that this keyword is same as this keyword right over here. Okay, so that's the overall scenario. Let's save this thing and let's copy this all profiles, paste it over here so we can get all the response. Let's save this thing, open our integrate terminal. Our server is restarting, everything is working fine for now. Let's open our integrate terminal and let's hit the request. And now right now you can see we are getting 200. Okay, and right now you can see we are going from right to left. So we are having profiles with their specific user. Okay, so we are having our profile first, and then we are having our user. Okay, now here is the confusing part. Okay, the confusing part is obviously you can see that we are obviously getting our profile, but we are also getting our user, and inside that user we are also getting our profile. Okay, and this is because we have defined our eager to true right over here. Okay, since we know that eager is true, whenever we will request our user entity, our user record, it will automatically append the profile record right over here. Now here is the trickiest part. Okay, so let's say if somehow I come over here inside our profile entity, and if I mark eager to true right over here. Okay, so what will happen? So look at the response. So what will happen is that it will look for our profile, and since we know that every profile must be having a user because user is equal to true, then since user is also having a profile and then profile should have a user, so it will go in an infinite loop. So that's why it is recommended not to use eager on both sides, and this concept goes same for the cascade as well. Okay, so you cannot use eager on both sides because it will stuck TypeORM in an infinite loop, because TypeORM will say, okay, yeah, whenever a user will request profile, I have to append user. So it will go to user, and here you can see it is equal to true, so it will say, okay, yes, whenever a user will request a user, so I have to append profile. Again it will go to profile, it will say, oh yeah, again I have to append a user here. So it will stuck in a nested loop, and same concept goes for cascading. Okay, so you cannot use cascade or eager both sides. You can use either on one side or either you cannot use it. Okay, you just don't use it. Okay, so I usually, whenever I work with enterprise applications, I don't use eager especially. Okay, so I will just remove eager from here, and let's say I will also remove eager from here. Okay, so this will make things simple. Okay, so now if you save this thing and open your integrate terminal, you can see our application is restarting. And now if you request your profile, so you will only get user, will not get a profile inside that user. Okay, so let's say if I hit this thing, now you can see you will only get a profile with this specific user, and now inside user you will not be getting that profile. Okay, since I have removed eager equal to true. So that's the concept of you can say eager and lazy relations. Okay, so this is the concept of eager and lazy relations, as well as the two-way relations which we have discussed. And again, these concepts apply to each and every scenario. Okay, so since we have only discussed one-to-one relation, but it applies to all the relations. So the next concept is obviously will be one-to-many relation and many-to-many relations. Okay, so now since I've tried my best to wrap up all the concepts in a single crash course, but I think the video is getting too much lengthy, so I think it's best to discuss these two topics in a separate part. So I will split this crash course into two different parts. Okay, so part one is whatever we have discussed right now, and part 2 will be coming soon, will be uploaded on my channel. Okay, so if you're liking my content, do like and subscribe this channel. Follow me on LinkedIn. The repository link will be also in the description, so do start the repository and follow me. So for now, thanks for watching. See you in the part 2 of our crash course.